The Miami Dolphins are hosting veteran wide receiver Odell Beckham Jr. today, and there seems to be some buzz headed towards a signing. So what are the pros and cons for Miami adding Odell Beckham to their ranks at wide receiver?
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And we are engaged in risky business here on a Thursday because Odell's already at the facility, and I am doing the recording as Odell Beckham is at the facility. So I have tried to frame this conversation in a light in which if Odell Beckham signs, you guys will understand what I think the ramifications are, and you will understand what my stance is for how it would be an appropriate signing for the Dolphins versus if he does not sign, what the potential risk is for Miami adding Odell Beckham to their wide receiver room. This has been teased for the better part of a week that the Dolphins are interested in a big name player to be their third wide receiver. There's been some buzz towards Michael Thomas from the Saints, Hunter Renfrow cut from the Raiders. A lot of Dolphins fans, their ears perked up with that announcement. Odell obviously has kind of floated along the last couple of years. He didn't play in 2022. He played in 2021 with the Rams down the stretch, helped them with their push to the Super Bowl. Played for Baltimore last season. Was a modest snap taker, about 500 snaps that he took, 62 targets that he took. This is, I think, the number one important thing to remember with Odell is that this is not a player at this stage in his career who's going to be a volume target in the passing game. There was just, four games last season in which he got more than 5 targets in a game. He didn't catch more than 5 balls in a game more than twice. He caught 5 balls in a game twice last season, and he only passed 4 receptions on 2 occasions and then had 2 more games with 4. So this is a player who in Baltimore was charged with being an ancillary piece of the offense, a complementary piece of the offense, which is good until you realize the price tag, and Odell played for $15 million last season. And that, I think, is what the Dolphins, if they're going to come to a signing with Odell Beckham, they're going to have to figure out the right beneficial cost. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in today's show. But as far as what Odell himself still has in the tank, at this stage in his career, he is a perimeter wide receiver to the umpteenth degree. He's played at least 80% of his snaps the last 3 seasons that he has played in 2020, 2021, and 2023. At least 80% of his snaps have come on the perimeter. This is a player who still has the athleticism necessary to create separation. He was obviously a marquee route runner when he first came into the league. That doesn't go away. The movement skills may wane and the ceiling may wane on what he is as a player. And I think he's in the midst of that evolution, but you still see the quickness at the top of the route. You see the efficiency. You see the ability to defeat press. All of that for Odell, and still having enough vertical speed, means he is a viable perimeter option, much more so at this stage in his career, even at this stage in his career, than I think what the Dolphins had with not Tyreek Hill and not Jalen Waddle last year, which was Braxton Berrios, who's back, River Craycraft, who is back. That signing was announced this morning. Chase Claypool, nowhere near the route runner. And then the year before that, it was Trent Sherfield. So I think for Miami, that this is a upgrade for the position that you are expecting, and the ramifications of that is probably just as much about the complement to other players as it is anything else. So you have a lower volume target who lines up on the perimeter, which will allow you to move your other receivers around quite a bit. And you still see the flashes of the burst and athleticism, but this is not the 1,400-yard receiver, double-digit touchdown player that he was when he first came in from LSU with the New York Giants. So that framing is important when we talk about if this is going to work, how it's going to work, and why it's going to work. I'm receptive to the addition of Odell Beckham. I know there's a lot of fans that have a reaction, a visceral reaction of absolutely yes or absolutely no. And this is most the case with most things in life. It's a shade of gray that I tend to find myself landing on. And I think from Miami, the issue is less with the scheme question, and it's more about the cost question with where this team is at in their stage of the offseason and the other investments that they've made and the work that is yet to be done. So I think that's the big mystery for Odell. They played in a passing offense last year that was a vertical style passing offense. Dolphins got a front row seat to the explosive capabilities of the passing offense of the Baltimore Ravens last year. And Odell was a part of that puzzle, separating down the field, some outside of structure stuff, but also I think showcases the movement skills to still thrive, especially when you consider his route running ability as a inside of structure player. And I think a lot of his production last year, there could probably have been more consistent early progressions for Odell Beckham. And that's, I think, a tightrope Miami's going to have to walk with Tua Tagovailoa. Is so many of the early progressions have been Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Authentically, do you just want to get into a space where you're reading the field and allowing that real time? Because that's one of Tua's better attributes is when they run the RPO and they run that kind of half field spacing, glance wheel flat. He just feels and sees that half of the field pretty well. That's one of his better strengths where it's, the timing of getting to what player is really based on defensive leverage. Can you use some of that and take advantage of that with Odell Beckham? That's part of the scheme question that we will look to explore next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So stick with us. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel is going to let you bet on every game of the tournament, whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed. It is time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet that wins. That's $200 to be used on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who is going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. I'm admittedly in terrified territory here, just refreshing the timeline to make sure I don't miss any news that does drop as it pertains to Odell Beckham. But this has kind of come together quickly. I know Josina Anderson's on the front edge of reporting here. Barry Jackson's on the front edge of the reporting here. So want to make sure that this conversation gives you proper perspective, regardless of what the news is that comes out, however soon it does come out. I think the benefit for Odell being a player that can still create separation at this stage in his career, we mentioned the ability to move around the other players if Odell is going to be a perimeter player in the offense. If Odell is going to be a perimeter player in the offense, that means either Tyreek or Jalen Waddle can then in turn be more of an amorphous weapon that's played off of another talent. They have the ability to play Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle off of each other, but when teams were correctly able to bracket or disrupt the timing of that, they didn't really have that third receiver that instilled the fear in you. And Odell Beckham, in theory, would be a player who could help resolve that issue. From a separation standpoint, Odell Beckham last year had, according to Next Gen Stats, on average 2.7 yards of separation per target last season. That was in line with Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb and DJ Moore, a couple of really, really, really good players. Was 1/10 of a yard lower than Stephon Diggs and Devontae Smith and Puka Nacua, Brandon Ayuk. Some pretty impressive players. It was more separation per target than Terry McLaurin with the Washington Commanders, and Brandon Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys had less yards per separation. Devontae Adams had less yards of separation per target. Garrett Wilson had less yards of separation per target. DJ Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Mike Evans, T. Higgins, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, Drake London, Amari Cooper, Michael Thomas, who was tied with Devontae Parker for the lowest yards of separation per target amongst qualifying wide receivers in the NFL, according to XGen Stats last year. So you're getting a better separator. You're just not getting a volume player per se. How does that quantify versus the two that the Dolphins had? You can find both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle had an average of 3.4 yards of separation, and Tyreek Hill had 3.3 yards of separation. And again, Odell Beckham sitting at 2.7. So more of a separator than anybody else the Dolphins had last year, more of a separation than some of the other names that have been associated with this spot for Miami, including Michael Thomas. That's good. So a perimeter separator who does run good routes in a timing-based offense, I think does have some ceiling to be a more impactful player than what he was able to forge for himself to the tune of 35 receptions on 62 yards or 62 targets for 565 yards and 3 touchdowns. But if you look at the risk, this is a player in Odell who is more of a late-stage career player at 31 years old. He will be 32 in November. You would assume this is a one-year deal, and that's okay. That kind of fits within a lot of what the Dolphins have done from a free agency perspective the last 2 seasons. You know, people want to point to this year and say, "Oh, the Dolphins didn't really spend in free agency. They didn't win the offseason like they have so many times before." And I think that's true. But like Mike White was the biggest APY free agent that they gave out last year from a total value perspective. And it was like him and David Long were the two like $10+ million per year contract players. So they've been more aggressive in free agency and more active in free agency this year than last year. But a lot of these players that are signing are not on multi-year deals. It seems to be the younger players that have a little bit more runway that are getting multi-year contracts. And that's a theme across the entirety of the league. I do think there is not to get into the cost, there's an opportunity cost with signing Odell Beckham. And some of that is related to the salary cap and whatever salary you would come to terms with on Odell Beckham. And we still really don't know where the Dolphins are at from a cap perspective. I would guess, just based on the trend that we've seen with stipulated money. I think Chase Young is a great example of this with the New Orleans Saints. So Chase Young signs a 1-year deal that is worth a reported 1 year, $13 million with the Saints. But Chase Young's contract also has a signing bonus of $1.8 million, a base salary of $2.7 million. So the cash that he is guaranteed is $4.5 million. And then per game, he gets $470,000 per game that he dresses with the team. So it's claimed he's getting a 1 year, $13 million fully guaranteed contract, but $8 million of that $13 million contract are related specifically to, do you dress for the game? Yes or no? If you dress, you get the money. If not, you don't. And I don't think that's the way per se that an Odell Beckham contract should be structured. But I think the maximum value of a contract for Odell Beckham is probably tied to performance incentives and statistical production and per game activity for games that he's available and dresses for the team. To kind of, you might get sticker shock when you first hear of a contract between the team. 1 year, $10 million, up to $10 million max value contract. Do I love it? No. But in reality, is that more likely to be a 1-year, $5 million contract or a 1-year, $4 million contract that you then in turn have to pay the bonuses on the back end of if he performs at a certain level throughout the season? The opportunity cost here with a contract like that or otherwise is, I would imagine it probably takes wide receiver off the board for you, as far as, at least with only having 2 picks, an early pick in the NFL draft. And they sent the whole contingent out to Texas yesterday to watch Jatavian Sanders at tight end and Xavier Worthy at wide receiver and A.D. Mitchell at wide receiver, and both these defensive tackles and Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat, Mike McDaniel's there, Chris Greer's there, Frank Smith's there, John Embry's there. Like, they had the whole group out there. And obviously Xavier Worthy set the 40-time record, so that's the name everybody's kind of buzzy on. I'm not going to sit here and say Xavier Worthy should be the pick at 21, but in this wide receiver class, I think there's a lot of attractive options on day 1 or day 2 to be a pick if you want a third wide receiver. And instead of being a 1-year contract on a short-term deal with a potential ceiling for a lot of spending, you'd be getting several years worth of rookie contract play. That's the opportunity cost that I'm most mindful and cognizant of. So let's talk a little bit more about the cost for Odell Beckham, what I'm comfortable with, where I think it would be a good deal for Miami, where I think it would not be a good deal for Miami. That's up next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what is important to you so you can make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. If a deal ends up getting done between the Dolphins and Odell Beckham, do not overreact to the initially reported terms of the contract, please. Please don't, because I would imagine they would put a upward ceiling of double-digit $1 million into an Odell Beckham contract. And if you got very lofty production for Odell and he reached that, it would be hard pressed to be mad about it, because that would mean he jives with the offense. Now, it might not mean good things for either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle and their availability for this season from an injury perspective, because that's your expected first and second primary targets in the passing game. And Odell has shown the last few years to not be a volume target in the passing game. I would hope that the contract, or at least what's considered signing bonus and base salary for Odell, if he were to sign in Miami, somewhere around $4 million, $5 million, $4.5 million, because Odell has to understand this too. He signed in Baltimore, perhaps with some of the expectation he was going to be a primary target for that Ravens offense, and Zay Jones ends up being the successful rookie that he was, but he signed before that happened. You had Rashad Bateman kind of not materializing as a first-round pick, so there was more upward ceiling for Odell from an earnings potential. If Odell is going to successfully assimilate into what Miami has, I would hope there is a correlation between the maximum cost and earning opportunity of the contract with the perceived role on the Dolphins offense. Now, if they do what the Ravens did last year, which was, hey, we're going to sign you to a 1-year contract and we're going to put void years on the back end of it to spread out the cap hit. That, I think, is what would really turn me off to adding Odell. I'm not interested in Odell this year in a 1-year deal with void years on the back end of it. And void years are something interesting that we're going to really spend a lot of time on tomorrow talking about, the same way that we did compensatory picks last week. Talk about what they are, why they matter, and why we care. But one thing that I will say about void years right now is void years is one of the newer trends and cutting edge tools in salary cap and salary management and cash spending management for NFL franchises. And it's kind of the wild, wild west right now. And what I would say is this: if you don't use it at all, you are putting yourself at a competitive disadvantage versus the rest of the teams across the league who are willing to do it. And in turn, in the here and now, are able to field a more competitive team. But there's a time and a place for everything. And on a 1-year contract for worth up to or worth $15 million in cash, to put void years, several void years on the back end to really diminish the hit that you're taking in the here and now is not an overly attractive outlook. And I know that the Ravens with Odell, they ended up cutting him as a post-June 1st designation. They kind of split up the void years of the contract. So he will ultimately end up being a $3.9 million cap hit this year, and then potentially another 8.3 in 2025. Like that is so extreme. And look, Baltimore, they went for it last year and they got to the AFC Championship game and they didn't make the leap through. But that's, I think, flies in the face of where Miami has kind of told us that they intend to be. So I would be surprised to see that. And if that was something that they did include, I would be disappointed and it would sour me on a potential fit. Now, the good news is we'll probably find out pretty soon whether or not this is happening, right? But the details probably will not be in until Friday or over the weekend, so we will have a chance to digest the facts as they come. Look for Odell Beckham as a potential headline this afternoon as a signing with the Dolphins. We've kind of broken down what my expectations would be, how I would like it as a fit, how I would not like it as a fit, and we'll see what they ultimately do. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Fins up.